Good evening, Erev Tov. Welcome to Temple Judea, a place to belong. My name is Garrett Hoffman, and I'm a member of this temple, along with the chair and creator of this event. I'm a proud Jew, a Zionist, and an unconditional supporter of Israel. Hey, Lily. Thank you. Temple Judea is extremely honored to be hosting this important community dialogue with these two distinguished speakers. I would like to quickly say a few thank yous to some people who have helped make this event possible. Of course, Rabbi Aronson, Karen Avraham, the rabbi's assistant, Danny Rogers, Ellen Franklin, and the Judea board. I also want to thank Carl Sussman for connecting me to JStreet to pitch this idea, Amos Buhai and Yael Mazel from JStreet, Roz Rothstein and her staff at StandWithUs, the Israeli American Council and the Jewish Journal for their promotional support, and my wife for being so supportive of me and all the time I spent on this event. And yes, I'll take the garbage out, the trash out tonight when I get home. After the conversation, we will open it up to questions and answers, as that's an important part of this event tonight. However, in order to maximize the dialogue between the audience and the speakers, we will only be taking written questions. There are people in the sanctuary that have pens and pencils and paper to hand out to anyone who may want to ask a question. When the conversation is over, Rabbi Aronson will ask for the questions to be collected, and he will then go through them and start posing the questions to our speakers. And just so everyone knows, the questions are going to be looked at by both someone from JStreet and StandWithUs, so equal representation of ideas. And we know there are differences of opinions and approaches to how best to support Israel. I hope that when our differences are put aside, we can all come together in our unconditional support for the people of Israel, the brave men and women of the IDF, and our belief in a homeland for the Jewish people. Disagreements within the Jewish community are a healthy and necessary part of our people's tradition. At the same time, we need to remember that for Israel, together with the United States, the bigger military, political, cultural, and social battles are against all forms of radical Islam, anti-Israel, and anti-Jewish activities such as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And I would like to conclude my remarks by saying, Am Israel High. Long live the Jewish people and long live Israel. Thank you very much. Todah Rabbah. And thank you. And I would now like to introduce the head rabbi of Temple Judea, Rabbi Josh Aronson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're thrilled to see all of you here. We're hoping for a great evening. I want to just give a little context to, and I want to thank Garrett. Where did Garrett go? Garrett did a great job in really organizing this and bringing this together and leading the negotiations. It was a great job by Garrett. You got everybody around the table, and it worked out very, very well. So we're grateful to Garrett. I want to provide a little context for how we got here and why Temple Judea thinks this is an important moment. I'm looking at the TV cameras from JLTV, and everyone should know that this is for rebroadcast later on JLTV. We at Temple Judea believe very strongly that there are lots of ways to support Israel. And it's perfectly acceptable, vibrant, and in fact necessary for a wonderfully thriving, safe, secure state of Israel to have a variety of organizations that support Israel from a variety of different views, and that's perfectly okay. By the same token, we at Temple Judea, and I guess I speak mostly for me at this point, there are some groups that I believe are really outside the pale of what we as Jews should accept in supporting Israel. If you know anything about me, and I know many of you may not, I'm very, very much opposed to and active in opposing, as I hope everyone would be, the boycott, divestitures, and sanctions movement, and I feel groups that support those endeavors are outside the pale of what is a reasonable approach to the state of Israel. But with that exception and the exception of a few others, I believe that there's an opportunity for a wide-ranging discussion of what it means to support the state of Israel. I believe that it's possible to support the State of Israel and love the State of Israel and being a lover of the State of Israel and hold a variety of different views and even hold conflicting views in your own mind at the same time. So what I'm hoping that we achieve tonight is for all of you to leave feeling that both Stand With Us and JStreet represent lovers of Israel, lovers of Zion, and although both may differ on some specifics about how to achieve the best future for the State of Israel, that's the goal that they're working toward. I do want to set just a few ground rules. We're in a sanctuary. I hope everybody will be mindful of that. I would like to ask henceforth until the very, very end, there's no applause, there's no non-applause, there's no anything that would be opposite of applause, there's no verbalization of anything except when I tell a joke. There could be laughing, but aside from that, we would prefer that it just... Sorry?
What about when I tell a joke?
Maybe when Alan tells a joke or when Philippe tells a joke. I would ask that you honor that, and we're going to keep a very strong lid on that as well. So with that caveat, we're thrilled to have Philippe Assouline here to represent Stand With Us and Alan Elsner to represent JStreet. And to begin, I've invited each of them to just offer an overview of their organizations and have an opportunity to speak for a few minutes. And I'd like to turn it over to our colleague, Philippe.
Thank you, Rabbi. Let's give a round of applause. I'm kidding. He said no. He said no. I'm going to stand and I'll explain why in a minute. When I was in Jewish day school, when I was considerably younger, I grew up in Canada. I recall the rabbi teaching us the Jewish answer to the call of duty. Hineni, I'm here. I'm ready to rise to the challenge. And so when Stand With Us was kind enough to ask me to represent them tonight, I tried to emulate what I believe Stand With Us stands for, which is Hineni, and I said I'm ready to rise to the challenge. To sit in front of 400 Jews and 1,700 opinions, and to sit on this substitute for a chair for an hour and explain why I think the principal calling of our time for people in the diaspora is to defend the truth, to defend the honor, not just of the state of Israel, but the people of Israel. And so, unlike Alan, I am a man who does need an introduction. Most of you probably don't know who I am. I grew up in Canada, like I said. I was a lawyer for a few dark years in New York. But I've always been committed and in love with the state of Israel. And I made Aliyah and became Israeli by choice in early 2010 after getting married. My first son was born there, my first kid, my son. And it's a land that re-educated me. I'd always loved the land, but I learned to love the people. They taught me what it is to smile in the face of adversity, to answer hatred with hope, to never lose your humanity and your compassion no matter what is thrown at you, and to expect FedEx delivery men to ask you how much you pay for rent. I left madly after an initial period of adaptation where I had to shed a lot of my Western entitlement. I did grow up in Canada. I learned what real maturity was, what endless compassion was, and what true wisdom on a large scale is. And I came here to pursue a PhD at UCLA, which I'm doing now. My wife also got a professional opportunity. We've had another daughter 2 months ago. She's 8 weeks old now. But we plan on returning to Israel because I think of it as home. And when I got here, the level of invective against Israel, and bear in mind, I've been involved in fighting anti-Israel campaigns since I turned 17. I'm 37. But the level of invective is something I never would have expected. The level of hatred, the brazen lies that I was confronting because I was reading the news and I was trying to get involved in any way I could, was alarming. And I decided to do something about it. And when I looked in the trenches, to the people who walk the walk, I mainly saw, I'm talking about on campuses here, facing the danger, a few inches from people screaming horrible lies. I saw Stand With Us. Stand With Us, before I go, for those who don't know, telling you what it is, I'm going to tell you what it is not. Stand With Us is not a right-wing organization. I worked with Stand With Us for a few months, and I was never told what policies I should support, which politicians I should back, what I should believe. In fact, it was probably like this synagogue representative of all kinds of views in the Jewish community. StandWithUs is not a lobbying group. We don't try to impose our policies through the American legislature. We don't, I'm saying we, but I don't work there anymore. That's how attached I feel. But it's not a group that tries to impose its way. What StandWithUs does is try to educate the masses that are forgotten all too often. And it's two ladies, Roz, who is here, and Esther, who in 2001, a few weeks after Yasser Arafat rejected wide and extremely generous peace offers and responded to those peace offers by launching in earnest a campaign of propaganda against Israel, which I'm studying now in my PhD and we can explore later. They decided, Hineni, I'm going to take ownership of this problem and I'm going to try to educate the masses. And Michael Lechail, they've grown and been able to reach now 5 countries, 18 offices, I think 500,000 people online, and an army of volunteers going, again, in the trenches, not in the polite rooms such as this, where people can have civilized and reasonable disagreements, but in the trenches. And I cannot underline sufficiently how brutal and ugly it is on our campuses. And they're trying to educate the masses through the pamphlets you've seen outside that they've printed, through events, and through a tireless effort to defend the honor and dignity of those Israelis I fell in love with. And that is why I was honored tonight, and I thank the rabbi also for having me, and I thank Alan for sharing the panel with me to come and speak for StandWithUs. Thank you.
I'm also going to stand because these are excruciating chairs, and it reminds me.
I just want to go on record as saying I did not choose the chairs. Someone else in our community insisted we use these, and
it reminds me of the story. The sages teach that there are 2 kinds of debates. There's a vikwach l'shem shamayim, which is a discussion which upholds the honor of those who take part of it and gives glory to the Creator. And an example of that is Hillel and Shammai. And if Hillel had to sit on this kind of a chair, you could understand why he'd want to stand on one leg.
I do want to say, I think we're going to stick with the chairs we have because we want to be seen on the screen and over everybody, but the donors of the chairs could be in the room. And we'll be very careful about the chairs.
I was interested I just met Philippe a short time before we began this, but we have something else in common that you may not know, that your son was born in Israel and my first son was born in Israel as well. I won't go through my biography. I might dribble it out bit by bit as the evening goes, but I want to talk a little bit about JStreet. About 3 years ago, I was working for an organization called the Israel Project. I was the executive director of that organization, and I received a phone call, an invitation to speak at the JStreet conference, and the topic was Israel and human rights. And I thought, well, this is going to be a scary kind of event. A bunch of raving lefties are going to tear me limb from limb, but I accepted the challenge, and I went to speak at the conference, and I said, first thing I said was, of course, you know, Israeli civil rights are a legitimate subject for Israeli citizens to discuss and to uphold. But when it comes to forums like the United Nations, there's a terrible double standard as applied to Israel. I got a round of applause. And then I said, and of course, why would the UN Human Rights Commission be investigating Israel and passing resolutions against Israel all the time and not against a country like Syria, which is actually on the board of or was at the time on the board of the Human Rights Organization. We got another big round of applause, and it went on like that. And at the end, the people, these raving lefties, came up to me and embraced me. Thank you very much for making these very important points. And a few months after that, I got an invitation to come and work for JStreet. And I think that the impression that the people have was the impression that I had, that this is some kind of radical organization way outside the boundaries. And incidentally, that was our conference 3 years ago. Our next conference will be in March in Washington, D.C., March 21st, 24th. We're expecting about 3,000 people, which will make it the third largest American Jewish gathering. And we really invite everyone here to consider coming, because it's really an amazing event because of the real complexity that's explore the diversity of views, the kind of different people that you meet there. You meet Palestinians, you meet Israelis. The last one we had speakers from 7 Israeli parties, including the Likud, including Shas, coming to our conference and sharing their views. And this conference will be a few days after the Israeli election, so obviously a very exciting time to come. I think the reason that JStreet expanded and exploded so quickly, this is an organization less than 7 years old, but already with branches and chapters in 50 cities and thousands of members, and a thriving campus, JStreetU presence in over 50 campuses, is that this was an organization that met a need that wasn't being met before. And that need is for people who love Israel but do not necessarily love every policy of the Israeli government, do not necessarily love the occupation, want to see Israel make peace, want to get to a two-state solution. And these people, and our polling shows that about 80% of American Jews hold those opinions, had no organization to represent them. At one of our early conferences, Amos Oz, the Israeli author, said, "I have been waiting all my life for an organization like JStreet to come along." I personally have devoted most of my life to fighting for Israel. I was a student activist 45 years ago. I was a volunteer in the Yom Kippur War at the age of 19 when I dropped my studies in Britain and went to Israel. I made Aliyah. I got married there. My children were born there. My parents lived there. My sister lives there. I served in the IDF in the First Lebanon War, not knowing at the time that there would be a Second Lebanon War, of course. This is a cause that I've given my life to. This is my final job. I expect to do it until I drop, or until there's peace, whichever comes first, and hopefully peace will come first. And it's that important to me and to our community that we have this organization speaking for our community, that part of our community that believes that there needs to be a way to express love for Israel and to express our hope for Israel, our hope that there will be peace.
What we asked really to reduce applause. I want to, each of you referenced in your opening remarks, you, Philippe, that Stand With Us is, has this maybe perception or is not a right-wing organization, and Alan, you, that JStreet is not this left-wing organization, and I'd like you each to speak about why it is you think people may hold those perceptions if they're in fact not true, and why don't we start with you, Alan?
Well, since JStreet's inception, there have been people in the Jewish American establishment who felt threatened by our organization and have tried very, very hard to spread falsehoods and dishonesty and basically to blacken our organization, and I find it bizarre. One of the most bizarre things I think that that happened when I joined JStreet was I started getting this kind of flood of hate mail from fellow Jews, death threats sometimes, threats to my children, threats to my family. And I was asking myself, where does this come from, this hatred, and why? Why are people so threatened? And I think that there is a perception, and I think it's a fair perception, Israel is always under attack, and that we need to close ranks behind Israel. And I, to a certain extent, agree with that. We must support Israel. We must be there for Israel. But I think that what's equally important is that we have a realistic dialogue with Israel, that we engage with Israel. I think that, there's a difference between, one of the strange things when I came to this country, and you can hear from my accent that I was not born here, I was born in Britain, obviously, was I went to an American football game, and for the first time I saw cheerleaders. And with the pom-poms and the cleavage, dancing around, go team, yah, 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 kicking up, the boots, the whole thing. I found it fascinating.
You obviously weren't watching too much of the football game.
I had no concept of what was happening on the field. It seemed to me, it was a very American thing of, short, endless committee meetings and short bursts of mindless brutality. But, there's a difference between being a fan and being a cheerleader. The cheerleaders are out there, they're paid to do it. Win or lose, they're going to kick their booties up in the air, they're going to shake their pom-poms. Doesn't matter how the team's doing, what the score is on the field. Now, the committed fan, and I consider myself a committed fan of Israel since I'm not living there right now, I'm not a participant, I'm not in the game, I don't vote in the election because I'm not there, but a committed fan is always talking about how's the quarterback doing, do we need a new manager, do we need a new tight end, whatever a tight, I personally have a very tight, but do we need a new running back, who can we get in the draft? That's a kind of committed fandom, committed dialogue with the team. You're not playing, but you're involved. And that, I think, is what JStreet offers, but some people obviously find that threatening.
Thank you. I do want to respond a little bit to what Alan just said. I think, with respect, it does us an injustice to say that there was no discussion or involvement prior to JStreet. JStreet started in 2008. I can remember 20 years ago reading about rabbis from Los Angeles taking pretty strong stands in favor of human rights and traveling to Israel. I have never in my life, and I've been involved in a lot of Jewish community activity, I've never in my life sat in on a room with Jews acting like cheerleaders, or unfortunately looking like cheerleaders. But I think it does us a great disservice to pretend that there's never been a voice from the left, or that's critical, or that is somehow more involved now that didn't exist prior to JStreet. And it's also the question, the reason why I take issue with some of what JStreet does is because JStreet doesn't merely try to inject a new voice into the discussion. It is a lobby group that tries to influence American policy to change Israeli policy over and against the wishes of the Israeli electorate sometimes.
Excuse me. I'm happy to, let's talk about that in a few moments.
Getting there.
But I'd really like you to address the question of why you perceive, why do you think there's a perception that StandWithUs is perceived as a right-wing organization?
I understand.
Okay.
That's why.
Why?
Because when you come and you say the left in the Jewish community didn't exist before 2008, what you're saying is the existing Israeli Jewish organizations are not pro-peace. And that, in conjunction with the Palestinian organizations like the AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, the SJP, their campus militia, Students for Justice in Palestine, they have a vested interest in making us, any pro-Israel community, but especially StandWithUs, which is their biggest opponent on campus, appear like right-wing lunatics. And you have Jewish organizations that are making a very loud case, like, we're here to fill a need. We are here to give you something that didn't exist before, which I think does a great disservice to the American Jewish community. Those two things combined have given StandWithUs a completely undeserved right-wing reputation. I worked at StandWithUs. I am very close to the people leading most of the efforts on campuses. And I can tell you, if I had to put a label on the people I worked with, it would be center-left. There is not one person I know at StandWithUs who is against Palestinian self-determination, who has come out vocally against the two-state solution, or any of those things. We are all very concerned about human rights, and we need to be to do what we're doing, which is talking to people on campuses who share that concern. But it's been framed differently, unfortunately, and that's very unfair. And also because the fact that the organization doesn't take official policy positions, it defers to the Israeli electorate's choice, it creates some space for people to give false labels.
So you think, and it sounds like Alan also feels the same way about JStreet, that the perception is something that's framed by other people, and that's why it doesn't reflect reality, rather than anything inherent in what JStreet does or what you do. It's things that other people perceive, but don't necessarily have any
I'll go
relationship to your
further
true
than
mission.
that.
I will too, but I mean that, you know, to talk about JStreet for a second, I don't believe that anyone made a movie, invested, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a movie and went around showing it in synagogues and federations and JCCs, full of lies, malicious falsehoods, blackening our organization. And that movie was called the JStreet Challenge. I believe your organization has had a part in sponsoring showings of that movie. And let me just tell you how they approached us, because they say we refused to engage. I got an email from somebody with an Indian name.
You're setting up, just to let people know who may not be familiar with that DVD, it sets up what premise in your mind?
Well, it basically comes out and says that JStreet is an organization that is funded by anti-Israel interests and is anti-Israel, and I totally reject that. But, you know, I just want to finish my little anecdote. I got this email from somebody with an Indian name saying, we're making a movie about the Middle East. Can Jeremy Ben-Ami, the president of JStreet, be available on such and such a day next week for an interview? He wasn't available that day. And I never heard from them since. Now, I was a journalist for 33 years, and I know that, you know, journalistic ethics absolutely forbid this kind of false presentation, presenting yourselves under false pretenses, and yet they go around saying we refused to take part in the movie. An absolute lie.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I'm obviously not personally involved in the movie. I think the desire or the feeling that such a movie was needed is largely in reaction to what I was saying. Creating a perception that there wasn't a moderate.
Did Stand With
voice.
Us have a role in producing the movie?
I'm told no. Okay, no.
Funding the movie?
No.
Promoting the movie in any way?
They've
Pardon?
shown the movie.
But your showing the movie doesn't represent your endorsement of the premise?
I can't.
It does. Okay.
I haven't even seen the movie, so.
1 second. Okay. So Stand With Us believes
But
the
I
movie's
want to go
bad.
back to the issue of perception. And talking about falsehoods, I don't know who this reporter was, and I'm not endorsing or condoning. It's happened to me in the past, and I've been smeared, not on the level of the movie, but in articles by pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel groups. I'm not endorsing that. But in terms of falsehoods, you know, I can point people to Jeffrey Goldberg's articles about the genesis of JStreet, and quite a few questionable representations there too. So it's not as if, again, one side is claiming to have a completely blank slate and pointing to the other side as you were doing things the dirty way, we're here to redeem the conversation. The point about perception, I want to go even further than what you said. Obviously, our actions matter. But I study propaganda and its effects on politics. And not only is perception created by what other people say, you can see this in any campaign in the world. If you don't take the bull by the horns and define yourself, other people will do it. And the negative image that Israel is suffering from now is only tangentially related to its policies, if at all. Not that I agree with all of its policies, not that anybody at JStreet agrees with all of its policies. But the way propaganda actually works in publics that do not have a direct stake in the issue is very different from what we imagine, especially as Jews who are addicted to debating. And yes, perception is set by other people. And so when an organization says we are pro-Israel, pro-peace, you're saying the other ones are not pro-peace. When you come in and you say, we come here to say you don't have the right to impose one view, as if leftist critical views of Israel didn't exist before. If anything, they existed to an enormous amount in the 90s, more than now. I was watching closely what was happening in America at that time. Rabbis for Human Rights, the Peace Now, USA, all these voices were very loud. In fact, they were drowning out voices that are more in the center. And on campus now, the courageous thing is not to criticize Israel. The easiest thing in the world now, the most risk-free thing in the world, the easiest way to get an audience and to be praised is to criticize Israel. The hardest, most courageous thing you can do, and it actually involves a physical risk, is to defend Israel. And so when you say there's only one voice in the conversation, I think context matters. It matters where you're talking about. And I believe some conversations right now are more urgent than others.
Okay, so let's use that as a stepping stone to ask each of you to talk about what is do each of you, speaking either for yourselves or for your groups, feel that criticism has a role in the way we relate and understand and love the state of Israel? And if so, what would the boundaries of criticism be? And I started with you before, so I'm going to start with you, Philippe.
I think criticism is vital. There's a saying in I forget which Jewish book, my parents spent so much money on Jewish school, but Ele ve'ele divrei Elohim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. You need a debate. And if anybody here has looked at my articles, I can be quite critical of the government of Israel. Context matters. Fairness matters. If I'm sitting in a room with Jewish people, if I'm in the Knesset, if I'm talking to Israelis, and I know everybody has Israel's best interest at heart, I will be the critical one. Then we need to always improve. Israel's greatest gift to the Jewish people was the idea that we don't need to wait for somebody to save us. We can look in the mirror and fix what we need to fix. It is critical. And in that sense, I welcome the idea behind what Alan is saying, is that we need to have voices that are not just cheerleaders. I don't think we've ever been just cheerleaders. It is not in the Jewish DNA to be just a cheerleader. I've had my grandfather disagree with what he said 10 minutes earlier because I agreed with it. But let's talk about what the context is now. The context right now, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you because I'm back in school, is an onslaught of the most vile and horrific lies about Israel. And they are working because people not only are not educated, but this is the ADHD generation, and they don't want to be educated. And we as Jewish people, I'm talking about people who don't have a direct stake, not the Jews, not the Palestinians, the masses in the center. And we as Jewish people have not yet mastered somehow the art of telling our story. And Israel is losing legitimacy to the point where it's threatening its security now. I don't think the problem of BDS is the divestment, it's the BS. Because when you're talking about divestment, you're talking about the D, the BS passes unchallenged. And in this context, where we are being slandered and dehumanized to the point where violence is occurring, the thing to do is not to exhibit public contrition. The thing to do is not to shout how, look, I can be critical of Israel too. The thing to do now is to defend the truth. We're not asking people to lie, God forbid. We're not asking people to be unfair. But the first urgent priority is to defend the truth against this campaign that seeks one thing and one thing only. And I'm ready to sit here all night to prove it to you. This campaign is not about human rights. I'm talking about the people on campus. This is a campaign to kosherize killing Jews, to kosherize terrorism, and to make the eliminationist rhetoric of the Palestinians noble. It is an abuse of compassion to disguise hatred as concern. And it is not about 1967, to my distress. It is about 1948. Whether we should at all have a place on earth to call our own. And now, in that context, that's the fight we need to fight, more than anything.
I would really like to ask people not to applause, if at all possible, and to, it's just not it's not fair to either one of our candidates. So let's let them speak and go ahead.
What was the question?
The question was, what can be the role of criticism in regards to our relationship with the state of Israel, and what would be the boundaries of criticism, if there are any?
I think that, there's this idea of we can be critical inside, but when we're outside, we all have to be good soldiers. It just doesn't hold water. It's not convincing. Philippe has painted a dramatic picture of what's happening on campuses. And I started my career as a student activist, and I know that these things can seem rather dramatic. But I think that what worries me is the idea of Jewish continuity and how we educate our children. I was 13 when the Six-Day War began. It was a vivid memory for me. I remember my parents being so worried. I didn't fully grasp it. I remember the pride that we all felt at that victory. When I was 19, the Yom Kippur War began. Those were live events for me. But what do our children, I have kids now in their late 20s, early 30s, what do they remember? They remember the occupation has always been there for them. They remember the Lebanon wars, the Gaza war, the rockets, the intifadas. It's a different kind of memory. And I think that many of you who are in this audience now may feel the same as I do, which is that our children, we can't rely on them to have the same commitment to Israel that we did growing up through the events that we grew up automatically. One of the interesting things about JStreet, and we don't pay people to come and join, they just come, is that the people, we thought, well, we would get some of the more disaffected people to come, but what has actually happened is that the ones who are coming are the ones who went through the Jewish day school, the ones who've been to Israel and have seen the reality and are looking for answers to their questions. And I think that, this idea that we can be critical inside these doors, but when we go out, we all have to stand firm and give the government line, is just not going to...
One second, let me finish.
Okay, but that was only clear.
Is just not going to be a sturdy enough glue to keep that next generation pro-Israel, involved in Israel the way that we want. And there are serious questions that we all have to answer. For me, the question of Israel's existence is not open to debate. The question of Israel's security is not open to debate. The question of imposing a peace on Israel through sanctions or boycotts or international pressure or resolutions or cases at the International Criminal Court, that's not open for debate. I also don't question the right of the Israeli people to elect their leaders. And it's interesting, in Israel, there's no absentee ballot. There are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are living in the United States that they can't vote. If you are an American living abroad, you can vote. But if you're an Israeli living abroad, you can't vote. And the reason for that is because if you're not sharing the dangers of the day-to-day of the moment, or if you happen to take a vacation of the day of the election, you can't vote. There's no early ballot. There's no absentee ballot. So I understand that the people of Israel have the greatest stake. My sister lives near Beersheba, and she and her family are often subject to these rocket attacks, and I've experienced them too on my visits to her. So I understand that I don't get rocket attacks in Washington, D.C., and she does. She sent 4 boys to the army. The last one is now 19, but she's been having to live with this fear of having a son in the army for the last 14 or 15 years. So I understand that she has a greater stake in it than I do. But I talk to her every day, and she's interested in having a dialogue with me and keeping me involved. And I think that that's the most important task that we have. And the way to do that is to be honest about the problems, about the difficulties, about the path that Israel sometimes takes.
Let me ask, as a follow-up, that's one thing to have that conversation with your sister who lives in Israel, who has a certain knowledge of the state of Israel, and hopefully, probably, a broad understanding of some greater Israeli issues. How can you have that conversation in a meaningful way on, for example, the campus of UCLA in the context of a lot of people who may not have that context in order to have that same kind of meaningful discussion and may only understand that discussion in the context that Israel is wrong and Israel therefore should be punished or whatever?
Well, what we found is that in many of these campuses, it's precisely the JStreet people who have the most credibility in building the alliances that they need to defeat these BDS resolutions. And the reason they have the most credibility is that they're known for taking a principled stand in favor of human rights, of a two-state solution, and of knowing that being pro-Israel doesn't automatically mean that you have to be anti-Palestinian. And that carries more credibility with these left-wing groups than going on there and saying, we're right 100% of the time, you're wrong, it's a zero-sum game.
Let me ask a question as well to you, Philippe. And I want to say before I do that you should start writing your questions. They're going to be passed to this aisle, or this aisle. And I'd like to see some of those questions start coming up as soon as possible. Philippe, is it possible that, if I understood you right, you're beginning to make the argument that having these conversations about criticism, say, for example, in the context of the UCLA campus, where there's really no understanding on the part of many people about the broader Israeli issue and the dynamics of the situation, can be a difficult road to hoe. Is it possible, however, that the policies in some cases of the Israeli government themselves are so dangerous that if we as Jews were so detrimental to Israel's future, that if we as Jews do not speak out, we're doing a disservice to the state of Israel?
There's a lot of things that I want to address. It's a good question. I think we have to have a bit more humility vis-a-vis the Israeli electorate and vis-a-vis this audience. There's a bit of a misrepresentation of what at least I understand this debate to be about. This is not about whether there should be a conversation. And I certainly don't know anybody at StandWithUs who stands there and says you're wrong all of the time and we're always right. I teach international relations of the Middle East. My closest friends are Arab Muslims and Turkish Muslims and a Palestinian guy. And I'm a rabid Zionist and there's no problem. That is because I'm fair, and a big part of that fairness was practiced at StandWithUs. This is not about whether there's a discussion. This is a misleading avenue. The discussion is there and it will always be there. This is whether we should, as American Jews, well, you're American, I'm Canadian, but we should, as American Jews, dedicate our money to a group that will try to impose its views via lobbying American congressmen, that will say it defends Israeli democracy by trying to exercise a veto over Israeli democracy. Now, do Israeli policies...
That group is JStreet in your view.
Correct, and I can prove it. Now, do Israeli policies always make sense? Absolutely not. But I have the humility to recognize that these people I discovered that when I was in Israel, the survivors of the Holocaust and refugees from Arab countries who have built a thriving democracy and who exhibit, if you go beyond the news, nothing but compassion and wisdom and love, and we're facing an impossible situation, have thought about the solutions that JStreet is proposing. In fact, they've tried to apply them for 20 years with cataclysmic results.
Such as which specific solution?
Unilateral withdrawal, land for peace without dealing with the ideological background of the conflict. You made me sore for my line of thought, but basically, I don't assume that the Israelis have made some great moral failing, that they are somehow like junkies who need an intervention, and they're waiting for us to come stop and save them. The Israeli public is incredibly mature. They send their kids to war. I have a friend who survived 2 terror attacks by the time she was 19. Her reaction was to go to film school, and her Arab friend made a movie promoting coexistence. I have another friend who was stabbed 43 times, lost her friend in a terror attack, looked at Israel around her, and said, I cannot wallow in victimhood, stood up, thank God she's alive, and is pushing now for better integration of the Arabs in Israel. These things are mass-produced in Israel. People who have vision, who do not fall into rancor and hatred. And their dignity is being robbed of them, not only by propaganda, but by this attitude that they don't know what's good for them. We here, in the unprecedented comfort of America and Los Angeles, get to tell them what to do. It's not about a discussion. They welcome it and I welcome it. I'm doing a PhD in political science. You better believe that there's discussion and that I sought it. It's about, do we lobby? Do we impose? And is our priority to criticize? Not do we criticize, but in the present context, where Israel is under attack by a propaganda jihad, okay? Do we choose to make our priority and to dedicate most of our efforts to criticizing Israel publicly? Because you can say you're against BDS, but if half the time you're giving credibility to the accusations of BDS and obfuscating the context, then you're just hurting. And in the present context, you need to know when to have the discussion, and that's not just inside. That's not true, but it's with whom, and at what time, and how publicly, and how not publicly, and when to have the other discussion. We need to know how to defend our case by another means than just being so eager to publicly exhibit our contrition. I don't think that judged on the standard of any other country, Israelis, or even any Western country, Israelis have anything to feel particularly bad about. I do not. And I'm willing to sit here and explain to you why I think that. I'm not minimizing Palestinian suffering at all. And I understand 100% why the people in this room might be very uncomfortable with what they saw this summer and why they want something to change. And knowing that, and being one of those people who was shocked at the images this summer, I still think that Israel deserves our humility and respect, and for us to let them make their own decisions.
What do you think is, do you want to respond to that? Sure, go ahead.
He's spoken for a long time.
I'm sorry, I didn't speak long.
Okay, by all means.
Let me just address a couple of points. Yes, we do lobby Congress. That's our right as US citizens to affect the policy of the US government, and that's the way the political game is played. There's another lobby up there that is much more powerful and well-established and well-funded than ours. And so, yes, we're quite open about it. We try to lobby for American leadership that would lead policies that would lead to a two-state solution. That is not to say that such a solution can be imposed, and it won't be imposed. I want to address this question of the occupation. My father is a Holocaust survivor, by the way, who made Aliyah 30 years ago and is really hoping, he's 96 now, that he sees a two-state solution and peace in the time that's remaining to him. I want to address this question, and let me just frame it in an anecdote. A few years ago, my mother, who has Parkinson's disease, broke her hip. And we were afraid that she wasn't going to make it. And I rushed to Israel, and she was taken to the Hillel Yaffe hospital in Judea. And she was, the ward is not luxurious. There were like 8 people in the ward that she was in. And I noticed, by the way, that the staff, at least 60% or 70% of the staff, doctors, nurses, auxiliaries were Arab Israelis, all working together, and some of the patients were Arab citizens of Israel and some were Jewish. It really didn't make any difference. And I've always been tremendously impressed with the way that Israel treats its old people, its elders, its seniors, with compassion and dignity and respect. But there was a young Arab man who was in a bed in the corner, and he was chained to his bed, and I asked, what's that guy doing? And it turned out that he had tried to stab a soldier on a bus, and he'd been shot in the leg, and he was wounded, and he was taken to the hospital. He's basically a terrorist. And what impressed me was everyone coming in to visit their relatives, nobody said any words of, nobody said anything to him at all. Nobody shouted at him, nobody yelled at him, they just ignored him. And I was just so impressed with not only the compassion which my mother was treated with, but also the dignity in the way that they related to that guy. But I have to tell you that there is another side of Israel. We saw it in the murder of Muhammad Abu Qadir, the 16-year-old, this summer, after the murder of the 3 students on the West Bank, who was cold-bloodedly tortured and burned to death. We saw it in the rampages on the streets of Jerusalem, that people being pulled off buses, being asked to say something, and if they had an Arabic name, being pulled off buses. We saw it in the tens of thousands of people who signed Facebook pages calling for vengeance. And we saw it to the extent that the Minister of Education instituted a whole year of education against racism in Israel. And we have to admit that there is a problem. And I think that the problem, ultimately, where does it come from? It comes from an ideology which holds land as more important than people, which puts land above people. And so I think that, there's an existential battle that's going on for the soul of Israel. And the more that this occupation continues, already between the Mediterranean and the River Jordan, if you count Gaza, there are more Palestinians than Israeli Jews living. But even if you take Gaza out of the equation, if there's not going to be a withdrawal, if there's not going to be a two-state solution, if Israel is going to continue the occupation, there will be a Palestinian majority within the next 20, 25, 30, I don't know exactly, but it's coming, certainly by 2048, when Israel celebrates its 100th anniversary, there'll be a Palestinian majority. And then Israel will face a choice, actually well before then, of whether it remains a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland, or whether it remains a democracy, because it will not be able to be both. And that is a horrible choice that I don't want Israel to make. It's like King Solomon cutting the baby in half. And when we talk about threats to Israel, yes, I'm worried about Iran. I'm worried about Hezbollah, the rockets. I'm worried about Hamas in Gaza. But I have tremendous confidence and faith in the IDF, in the Mossad, in the Shin Bet, in the military intelligence, in the people who are working the computer viruses, in all those defenses to find and figure out solutions to those problems. But what really, really worries me is this insidious, creeping threat to the soul of Israel's democracy. And we know from our history, from our sages, that we weren't just given the land of Israel. We were given the land of Israel on the condition that we live in a certain way. And we lost it. And it could happen again. God forbid. And that's, I think, the message, the urgent message that JStreet has to bring to the Israeli people, whether they want to listen to it or not. It's very important that they hear from our community, we love you. We want the best for you. We want you to succeed. We are deeply concerned at the direction in which you are going. They don't have to take our advice. We're not imposing anything. They should hear that cry from the heart.
Before either of you say another word about the subject matter, I want to ask if there are questions being ready for being presented to me, and I don't know, there's Garrett has a bunch of them, so that we can come up and see that.
And I would like to address that.
1 second, sure. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll probably have way more questions than we can get to. Did you want to say something briefly?
I'll try. I'll do my best.
Please do.
First of all, I'm not defending a right-wing agenda here. Again, StandWithUs doesn't take any official policy positions. My personal view is that there should be Palestinian self-determination and Israel should not be controlling Palestinians. But I also know, which unfortunately a lot of people don't know, the reason that the Israelis are still there and having to deal with brutal terrorism is because the Palestinians have been offered, according to Dennis Ross, who should know better than anybody else, and a number of other people, all of the land, or virtually all of the land, 4 times in the last 14 years. And they have rejected that or walked away 4 times. The part...
So I'm just curious. That's true. So based on that, what should happen?
Okay, so personally,
yes.
Again, not StandWithUs doesn't take any official position, but I think they'd agree. I think what has been lacking in all these peace programs with the Israelis, the message you said that JStreet is bringing about a threat to Israel's democracy is not JStreet's message. It is a profoundly Israeli message, and it's existed for 40 years. It is the logic behind Oslo itself. There is nothing new in what Alan just said. It is an Israeli message, and the Israelis were perfectly capable of coming up with it. They offered land, we got an explosion of terrorism and hatred. Because Yasser Arafat used the land that he was given to build an army and propaganda. Israel withdrew unilaterally and removed all the settlements from Gaza. It got a rain of 15,000 rockets on sleeping children. What is lacking is for us to stop coddling the Palestinians, and if we want to give them self-determination, we need to give them accountability. There is no state that is built on victimhood. And I would like, if you give me a moment, maybe as an answer to the questions, to read a passage by Shlomo Ben Ami, maybe Israel's most leftist foreign minister ever, decrying the effect of wanting to make the Palestinians victims on their ability to make healthy decisions. It is because we coddle them and we refuse to hold the Palestinian leadership to account that the Palestinian people suffer. They can reject peace offers that satisfy all of their objective demands short of the right of return, including East Jerusalem, and they can walk away and Israel will be blamed. And the reason for that is because the stories of Abu Qadir and all these exaggerated stories of Israeli racism, and with respect, I don't think Israelis have any lessons to take on racism from Americans. But these stories of Abu Qadir getting killed and of these hooligan idiots in Jerusalem rampaging are known. What is not known is the reaction of hundreds and thousands of Israelis who went to the mourning tent to offer their condolences to their family. Is that people do not know that in hospitals even terrorists are treated with dignity. And this idea that Israelis are somehow being entrapped by a spirit of hatred is false. And I urge you to go and see it. The last Knesset was the most liberal Knesset in the history of Israel, in terms of what it did, not what it said. Now, of course there's a lot of people I disagree with. There's a lot of people I disagree with in Israel, on the right and on the left. But this notion that they need us to come save them, that they're not behaving with dignity, no. They're facing an impossible problem and trying to respond with the most humanity possible. I want to see a Palestinian independent state. I don't want Israelis to rule them. But I know that they need to go through the soul searching that Israelis went through in the 90s to accept that we have a right to be there too, and we will not go away. And as long as we blame Israel for everything, as long as we let them wallow in victimhood, that will not happen. That soul searching will not happen. To criticize Israel publicly without setting the record straight is to make peace impossible, because it is to deprive the Palestinians of the soul searching that they need for democracy and to accept us.
So what do you see as the role of diasporan Jewry in terms of relating to Israel? What should be our appropriate role?
Again, I think it's dependent on context. I write op-eds. I try to make
About what?
About Israeli policies, all kinds. I mean, there was an exchange with Alan and I in the Jewish Journal about this proposed law about the Jewish identity of the state. Again, my personal opinion, not stand with us, but we basically came out on the same page for different reasons, but we more or less agreed on everything. I take tremendous issue with a lot of policies, but it depends what is more urgent and where do we do what we do. If we can have an influence on Israeli policy, we should do that where we can have an influence in, I think, legitimate ways, not by overriding Israeli democracy.
Where would be one way that we could have a legitimate influence?
I think if people even want to fund particular campaigns in Israel in accordance with the law, they should feel free to do that. If they want to write opinions, if they want to support certain candidates, always leaving the final choice to the Israeli voter. You can have whatever opinion you want here, and we always have. But I think we need your help. You're right that JStreet can do something.
In that context, when I read recently that 90% of Netanyahu's funds for his campaign come from Americans. And of course, there is one, when we're talking about Americans telling Israelis what to think and how to behave, there's one glaring example of that, who is Sheldon Adelson, who finances a free newspaper called Yisrael Hayom. It loses $3 million a month, and it's called the Bibiton in Israel, which means it's the Bibi newspaper. And I even have a quote here from Naftali Bennett, described it as a mouthpiece of one man. And Avigdor Lieberman, these are not liberals, called it Pravda, and he should know, because that's where he comes from. So, $3 million a month to fund a free newspaper devoted to the cult of Bibi by an American. The biggest circulation newspaper in Israel. It basically destroyed much of the rest of the media because they can't compete with a man whose pockets are empty. Without
Endless,
limitless,
right.
Limitless, and who's willing to throw $100 million at Newt Gingrich in America and $36 million a year on the right and the cult of Bibi in Israel. And that's perfectly legal. It's perfectly okay. But don't come to me and say we're imposing what Israelis should think.
There's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between
Philippe?
Adelson or Soros
Philippe,
and a lobby group.
excuse me, Philippe, I would like to change the conversation.
I don't want to lose the subject.
Okay. Let's change the conversation to something much less controversial and talk about the settlements. Realizing that each of your organizations may or may not have a view, and you can either speak for yourself or for your organization, but I'd be interested to know, and I'm quite sure looking at our questions that the audience would like to know, talk to us a little bit about the settlements. Let's start with Alan.
I really admire the settlement movement in one way, and that is that they have a logical worldview. The land of Israel was given to the Jewish people by God. It's up to them to go and settle it. And they work on it persistently, every single day, day after day after day. And that, you know, successive Israeli governments have opposed various settlements, they've delayed various settlements, but always the settlement movement keeps on trucking, keeps on going. And so you've gone from a situation of about 10,000 settlers living across the Green Line in the West Bank when I was living in Israel in the early 80s, to something like 500,000 now. And if I sometimes try to put myself in the shoes of a Palestinian. Not that I am a Palestinian or I ever would be a Palestinian. I know what I am, I know whose side I'm on, I know which team I'm on, but I try to put myself in their shoes. And now if you drive from Jenin in the north, all the way past Hebron, Daharir in the south, the entirety of the West Bank, you're never going to be any time on that road without seeing settlements on the hilltops. So from the Palestinian point of view, the question is, if they're building that settlement, what's it for? Are they going to give back the land? Now I understand that there are settlement blocks and that, you know, under the Kerry proposal, 80% of the 75 to 80% of the settlements that were in specific blocks could remain in Israel, and I think that the settlement blocks is a great strategy. But you know, the agenda of the settlement movement is clear. They want to keep the land. And I respect them because they have a logical position. The Israeli government's position is, well, we believe in a two-state solution. We believe that one day we will give up the land, but in the meantime, we're building. When I lived in Jerusalem, I rented a house from a guy who went to move to Beit El, which is a settlement on the West Bank, north of Ramallah, where he got free housing subsidized by the Israeli government. Meanwhile, he was happy to collect $1,500 a month from me. And the settlement movement, we have to realize, has been conducted at the expense of other parts of Israel. Go to Ofakim in the Negev, go to many of these communities that are under rocket attack, and you will see neglected communities where there has been no investment, where there has been even Sderot, which has become a fashionable go-to place. Until rockets started falling on them, Sderot was a godforsaken, forgotten place where they dumped a bunch of Sephardic immigrants and told them to get on with it. Meanwhile, money's flowing to the settlements, subsidies, you name it, to build these glorious towns and cities on what Israel itself says is land that is designated for the Palestinian state. So it makes no sense to me. I don't think settlements are the only obstacle to peace, but I sure as hell think that they are a big obstacle to peace.
I'm going to give you a chance. I do want to say, and I realize you probably want equal time, you should have it to Alan, but we are getting feedback from our audience that they appreciate a bit more brief in your answers so we can cover more ground.
Talk to my wife. And when you come up with a way for me to shut up sometimes, I think she'll be very grateful.
Just reflecting the feedback of the audience.
Oh, I am not surprised. I don't think the question, again, is are the settlements right or wrong? We can disagree, and I'm by no means a champion of building everywhere and anywhere. Again, my personal position. It's a question of what do we as American Jews or Canadian Jews sitting with American Jews do about the settlements. The position of JStreet is to push via money from other billionaires to make the US administration turn Israel into a criminal overnight. To have the US administration, and I quote, groups like JStreet are already pushing is that one step that groups like JStreet are already pushing is that the United States should return to defining West Bank settlements as illegal, as was the position of the US government before 1980s. I don't think this will help peace, to turn Israeli compromises and risks for peace into debts owed by a criminal. I think what should be done about the settlements is to challenge the Palestinians to offer the settlers citizenship in their new state. The land issue would go away like that. And they would benefit from a minority of people who would enrich the country. And those who don't want to stay would leave. No need to destroy homes. But we've somehow accepted that Jews don't get to live here is a precondition to peace. Why can there be 1.6 million Israeli Arabs living in Israel, but there can't, the idea that 200,000 Jews would live in the Palestinian state is unthinkable. Why is that? And why don't we rise to that challenge to try to make them understand that if you want peace, you should have peace? I'm willing to give it, personally, I'm willing to give it, I would go home and vote. I wouldn't try to impose it through here, and I'm no fan of Adelson. But I would push the Palestinians, I would push this politics, learn tolerance. I think it is a litmus test for how stable any withdrawal will be. If they can accept a small number of Jews living amongst them, and sadly they cannot, because we justify and bend over backwards to justify every hatred of Israel by somehow rationalizing it as based on what Israel did. The answer to the settlements is to give them to the Palestinians and let the Jews stay there.
So just to be clear, this is your opinion.
Yes.
Your idea is that there would be a Palestinian state declared or in some nascent form, and that organization would then offer citizenship in its nascent state or shortly to be declared state to all of the Jewish people that live within what its defined borders would be.
The ones who want to stay. This has been floated already. Again, the Israelis are perfectly capable of thinking of these things. They live the danger daily. And it was floated, and the former Prime Minister of the Palestinians, Salam Fayyad, I believe, was the one who said, we welcome them. The next day, he got threats or whatever, and he said, I changed my mind. Not one Jew will stay here. And Abbas has repeated that a number of times. The idea that you can have a state built on the precondition that they don't have to see one Jew in it, not an Israeli settlement, turn it into a Palestinian village. But we're not even coming up with that proposal.
I would like to say something to that.
We're going to try and stick to the brief thing, but by all means.
All right, you know what, in the interest of moving things along and getting more...
I'd like to hear your response. I think the audience, congregation would like to hear the response.
I certainly don't disagree that Jews should have the opportunity to live in the Palestinian state after it's established, but let's look at these settlements right now. They are de facto annexed Israeli territory. If you're a settler living in a settlement, you're under Israeli law, you're connected to the Israeli power grid, you can't be, you have all the rights of, you can vote. Those are the ones, living outside the border of the state of Israel, those are the people who can actually vote. Because it's been de facto annexed Israeli territory. And they have all the democratic rights that go with it. Palestinians living next door. And incidentally, if you're a Palestinian, you can't live in Ariel, you can't live in Beit El, you can't live in these settlements. They're heavily armed, basically the most radical and the most zealot element
please.
Of the population. And I just, I think that let's be realistic. These are two people who have been in conflict for decades, for a century. It's going to take a little bit of time to live as good neighbors. The lion, as Ben Gurion once said, the lion should lie down with the lamb, but I want to be the lion.
Let me ask you this. Alan, what is the plan then for negotiations? How does that go forward? How do you respond to the idea that we've offered the Palestinians, or Israel has offered the Palestinians, time and again, a variety of different ways to resolve this situation? They haven't taken any of them. And if we hear all the time, and I've heard this from people involved with the negotiations, that the deal is there to be done. Most people know the contours of the deal. If the Palestinians would simply grab the brass ring, we would bring this to a conclusion. Who are we supposed to, what do you envision negotiations look like when there's a group of people, the argument, there's no real partner for peace, there's nobody there negotiating with us?
I believe there's no real partner for peace on either side right now.
But Israel has...
I agree that Yasser Arafat was certainly not a partner for peace. I actually covered Yasser Arafat. I met Yasser Arafat, a more slimy individual you could not come across. He was, very anxious to pull out of Camp David. He would not go down in history as the person who gave back the right of return, and instead he launched the second Intifada.
What should Israel do that they haven't done, though?
I think that the 2007 negotiation broke down simply because the Palestinians couldn't make a deal with Ehud Olmert, who was about to be indicted and possibly was forced to resign and you know, might well still end up in jail. And it's, you know, I think perfectly understandable that this kind of deal, this kind of dimensions, couldn't be made with a politician in that situation. You just can't, you know, how can you make a deal with somebody who's not going to be there 2 weeks from now, who's about to be criminally indicted? So I think that, you know, and the last negotiation that we had, the Kerry Initiative, neither one of them went into it with any sincerity. They both went into it unwillingly, and they both took every opportunity to downgrade, denigrate, humiliate the other side, and they both took every opportunity to do negative things that were designed to kill the talks. And the Palestinians welcomed back murderers who were released out of prison, and you saw Mahmoud Abbas kissing them, and it was disgusting. It was horrible, but at the same time, Netanyahu didn't go a single day without saying that Abbas was not a partner for peace, and that he cooked up this Jewish state issue, which we fortunately, you know, agree on, and the settlement drive went on, which obviously weakens any Palestinian leader. So that was not a serious bid, and I quite frankly look at the two-state solution right now as more of an aspiration than anything realistic. I don't think that these leaders are going to get us there, but I think that the idea has such a compelling logic as the only solution that anyone has yet offered that makes sense, and even Philippe agrees with that, that eventually we will get back to it, because there is no other solution that keeps Israel Jewish and democratic.
So, Philippe,
I don't know that there's no other solution. I think ultimately the importance is, I can think of a number of alternate solutions, but I think the importance is, first of all, not to push the Americans to declare the settlements illegal and create a strategic environment for the Palestinians where all they have to do is wait. They'll just sit around and wait. The offers will get better, the pressure will get bigger, or Europe will give them a state on a silver platter at the UN. That is not what's going to push people to compromise for peace. Dennis Ross and Condoleezza Rice, people who were very privy to these negotiations you're talking about, don't dismiss it simply to the case of Olmert being a lame duck. They put the responsibility squarely on Abbas. Why don't we expect Abbas to come up with his own offer? Why is it always Israel that's supposed to come up with the offers? And we're talking about leaders. We're talking about leaders. The present leaders, I don't really disagree with you that on either case there's the personality you need to make peace. The difference is Israel's going to have an election in 3 months. Abbas is in the 10th year of his 5-year term. And you have the looming risk of Hamas at any moment. And if anybody has a phone here, go to palwatch.org and look up what Abbas has been saying about terrorism. I insist that whether it's a two-state deal or some kind of confederation of the West Bank with Jordan or whatever it is, I probably agree with you on most of the details, but whatever it is, what we have not done is address the ideological poison that Arafat made so much worse in the political discourse of the mainstream Palestinian. Mainstream. There are some voices that are coming up to counter that, and we should encourage them, but very few.
So you would agree with the idea that at the moment, the two-state solution is more aspirational than realistic?
I think it's always been aspirational because we haven't addressed the ideological underpinnings. But my most important point is that we should not go around pushing our solutions as if truth is clear, as if there's no debate to be had. Of course, this is what they should do. I'll get the Americans to impose it. I think we should defer to the Israeli public. They are a rational, reasonable public. They are more mature and enlightened than most of the publics in the world, and definitely have earned our respect with how they've responded to what they faced.
So you would say that a one-state solution is, in general, you can see, you can envision.
No, I can't. Personally, I can't envision a one-state solution, no.
Do you think the leaders of Israel can envision a one-state solution? Not people way onto one side, but reasonable leaders of Israel envision a one-state solution?
I think what they would envision is the idea that there may not be an immediate solution, and to manage the conflict. You're talking about the Palestinians not being able to live in Ariel. The Palestinians live under different laws because they fought in order to live under different laws. They're living under their own once elected leaders. 98% of them or 97% of them. If they do not live under Israeli laws, it's because they don't want to. Unfortunately, the process that was going to lead to a state 4 times was rejected by them because I don't think they've come to terms with the existence of Israel.
So in the interim, in the aspirational...
In the interim, they're going to manage the situation as best they can, as long as
including continued
John Kerry
building
doesn't come and stir the pot without fully understanding the dynamics, enrich the Palestinian communities. This is not necessarily my position. I'm saying what I think you're asking what I think they enrich the Palestinian communities, create bonds of business and exchange between them and Israelis.
What about continued building in the settlement areas?
I don't know what the Israelis have in mind. I know that the building
Do you
that's
think
been
that's a good
happening-
idea?
Personally?
Personally.
I think it depends where, and I think it depends, sometimes it could be bad, sometimes it could be right. I think a lot of the construction that's been announced has been precisely to change the strategic environment. If the Palestinians just need to wait, and they are patient people, as Saeb Erekat boasts about it, if all they need to do is wait and they'll get their state without making peace, then maybe building in some places is going to give them an incentive to...
You know, the problem...
I don't agree with that necessarily. But I'm just saying that might be some of the logic behind it. But where they're building is Jerusalem. Where they're building is, like Alan was saying, is blocks that Israelis are going to keep. The message might be wrong. But let's not pretend here it's a bunch of fanatical crazies who are going to build in the middle of Nablus. It's not. And most of the settlers are not at all how Alan described it.
It's a bunch of fanatical crazies who have built in the middle of Hebron. And let me just say that
very briefly.
The problem with this is that if it goes on, dunam by dunam, house by house, unit by unit, you are eating away at the possibility of ever having a two-state solution. And it's not like we're doing them a favor. We're doing ourselves a favor. We're doing something which is necessary to our survival as a democracy and as a Jewish state. Now, I'm not the defense attorney for Mahmoud. All right, sorry, go ahead. Ask
I have a lot of questions in my hand about the two-state solution and the settlements, which we've been addressing. I do have one question that we haven't been addressing, which I think is a very interesting question, which is, can either one of you or both of you envision a project that your two institutions, organizations would work together on?
Yeah, for sure. I am not in the leadership of
course.
And I'm not getting paid to do this, so I'm speaking about what I can envisage. I'm not an employee. But on campus, fighting BDS, more than just one declaration here or there, actively rebranding Israel as what it really is, I think JStreet can play a tremendous role. And I don't disagree with you that it might be in our interest to withdraw. We don't have to tell them that it's in our interest to withdraw. Like when you're going to go buy a house, you don't need to tell the person, I'm desperate, I'll pay anything for this house. You need to have a bit of chokhmah, a bit of wisdom about how to, especially in the Middle East, where things are seen as a zero-sum game. They get the message, if it's good for the Israelis, it must be bad for them. And where honor matters. You have to give them the impression that they're reaching an honorable deal, not with the way it'll get better. So I kind of swerved on my question because I do that. I'm sorry, but yeah.
That's okay.
Yes.
We're Jewish. We swerve on questions. That's who we are.
I think the most useful thing that we can do together is keep debating, although the next time I think we should, I should substitute myself with somebody who's more loquacious and maybe Philippe with somebody who's less loquacious.
I'm not sure what loquacious means, so I'll just smile.
It means you are a very, very intelligent, well-spoken representative of your organization.
Thank you.
We're really kind of approaching the end of the evening, and we could go on for a long time. Most of the questions I got from the members of the audience really did have to do with settlements and a lot of the issues that we really talked about, which is why I haven't directly read a lot of those questions. However, each organization, each representative has been offered an opportunity for a, let's call it 5-minute summation. Alan, we'll start with you.
Well, I want to thank Rabbi Aronson and Temple Judea for hosting this evening and everyone for coming. And obviously I want to thank Philippe for being a formidable partner here on the podium. And I've been deeply impressed with your commitment and with your ability to express your viewpoint. I want to leave you with a message that, that what we share is a love of Israel, and we both want what's best for Israel. I think there is a disagreement on our role in helping that come about. To the extent that we can be active on campus, I think that, soldiers in the same fight against BDS. My days of being on campus are long behind me. And my concern now is with our community and the future of our community and the dialogue and the relationship that our community has with Israel. And I think that what we need to be is engaged honestly in a deep and detailed conversation with with Israelis and Israel on many, many different levels about the different threats that they face. And I would urge everybody to visit Israel frequently and to get to know Israelis and to travel around, but also go to the West Bank, see what it's like there, visit some of these settlements, take a look, go to some of the villages. Actually, JStreet, offers little trips for students, one-day add-ons at the end of what are they called, birthright tours, which are very eye-opening, because I bet you, most of you have been to Israel multiple times, but most of you have not been to the West Bank, and it's not as beautiful and hunky-dory as you imagine. No, there isn't, daily brutality going on there, but there's daily harassment, there are checkpoints. I remember when I did my army training, I did it in the West Bank. Now, I didn't do anything awful, but our last day of training, we had to do it was night, we had to do a 30-kilometer stretcher march, and this was the kind of make-or-break event that you did to pass through your training. 6 people carrying a stretcher with the heaviest guy on top. I mean, you carried it for 1 minute and you rested for 30 seconds. And so there were 6 people, 4 people carrying, 2 people resting, 30 kilometers, up and down hills. And we went through a village and we were singing and yelling because we were soldiers and we were trying to get through the march. And it was only afterwards that it occurred to me that we woke up all those people. It wasn't a deliberate act of brutality. No, but we were able to do that because we were the soldiers, we have the weapons, we were the occupiers. So I'm just saying that, Israel has to be Israel in order to command our loyalty, our affection, our allegiance, that of our children in the long term. Not me. I'm with Israel, right or wrong, 100% all the way. But my children, my children's children, how are we going to forge that chain, link by link? When my son was born on Har Tzofim, on Mount Scopus, he was given to me just after he was born, and it was like a picture window when I was looking out over the Mount of Olives and the old city. And I thought, this is such an amazing moment. I'm given the next generation in my arms, looking over our homeland, which we fought and sacrificed so much to have. But it depends not only on having a strong army, not only on having all the weapons in the world and the iron domes and all the intelligence in the world. It also depends on us remaining true to our Jewish values, our heritage. That's what Israel is to me. That's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you. Philippe.
I think Alan does deserve a round of applause, and when I was looking him up, I tried to do some homework before I came. The only thing I could think of is the only thing I have to say to this guy is thank you. Thank you for really dedicating your life with passion and elegance and loquaciousness to defending Israel. The question is, how do we ensure continuity? And I think we ensure continuity by reclaiming the narrative, not by apologizing and holding ourselves to an impossible standard. It's one thing to hold ourselves to a higher standard is self-love. To hold ourselves to an impossible standard that nobody could ever meet is self-destruction. And it has led us to apologize as the first thing we do. And I'm sorry, there's people not of good faith like you are here who are taking advantage of that. Now I want to read you something. First of all, just the point about waking up. The soldiers are forced. It's not like I don't like calling it an occupation because of the context of the Palestinians rejecting our offers, but the point of the soldiers walking through those villages and training and making noise. I wish we didn't have to have soldiers. I wish 18-year-olds and my friends didn't have to go risk their life this summer and almost die because somebody decided to fire rockets because they didn't have any money coming in from Egypt. And I've been in Israel, I lived in Israel. I also have been woken up in the middle of the night many times. You know by what? Mosques, muezzins praying in the middle of the night. Because that's what Israel is and still is, and has not lost. We tolerate and embrace and welcome diversity and let Muslims pray in the middle of the night, loudly as is their tradition, and wake us up. Which is unthinkable in the rest of the Muslim world, and I think is unthinkable in a lot of the US too. So I want to read you something about what happens when we apologize, when there's this Jewish urge to exhibit public contrition to the point where we don't even demand fairness for ourselves. And this is a quote from Shlomo Ben Ami. Shlomo Ben Ami is a historian, and he was the Israeli foreign minister who offered to Yasser Arafat twice 94 and 97% of the West Bank, a certain measure of compensation for the right of return, and shared sovereignty over Har HaBayit, over the Temple Mount, and control over almost all of East Jerusalem, keeping a little part for Jews, that almost if you want to visit part of Jerusalem, you have to show your passport to a Palestinian police officer, only to have Arafat reject it and turn to Durban, at the Durban Conference Against Racism in 2001, and launch all these campaigns, using everybody's emotional triggers to demonize Israel. Apartheid. To certain people, it's ethnic cleansing. To certain people, it's genocide. Whatever it is that you have a box in your head that will make you feel bad, he puts Israel, the Palestinians in the victim box, and therefore Israel is the criminal. And we have internalized that. The fact that we're speaking here as if Israelis are suffering some big moral crisis is a tremendous victory for Palestinian propaganda, and it is not deserved. And I urge you to go to Israel and see who the people are, and to place what they have to do in the territories into the context, into ascribing blame where blame is due, and to stop treating the Palestinians in a profoundly racist way as invariably victims who cannot be expected to act rationally. And this is what I'm going to read you from Shlomo Ben Ami. Rarely, if ever, is history familiar with a similar case of a disparity between the high degree of international support enjoyed by a national movement and the poor results of such a support. At every junction of historical decision-making, the international community gave them, that's the Palestinians, the sense that they were entitled to expect more and could therefore avoid a decision. The international pampering of the Palestinian national movement is unparalleled in modern history and, no less important, was at a vital crossroads of the conflict an obstacle to the settlement. For it was frequently interpreted by the Palestinian leadership as an implicit encouragement to persist in its almost built-in incapacity to take decisions and find instead satisfaction in Israel's decline into the position of a state put in the dock of the tribunal of international opinion. The Palestinian leadership failed its people primarily due to the lack of will or capacity to process a positive founding ethos that would enable them to assume a reasonable compromise. We do not lead the Palestinians to the necessary soul-searching by taking all the blame, by hogging all the accountability. We do not help peace come along by sparing them responsibility and by always invariably apologizing. And I submit to you that the Israeli public is well aware of what it needs to do. It is well committed to its moral and Jewish values, and it is doing the best it can in an impossible situation. And it needs our support, not our judgment. That's it. Thank you very much.
I think we get applause for both Alan, Lee. I am very grateful for their talk. I thank you. Thank all of you for your rapt attention. Thank you. We hope you have a wonderful evening.